This paper is a double-blind randomized control trial that looks at CPC mouthwash and COVID viral infectivity over the course of 3 hours. Diving in, it's a multi-center, double-blind, placebo-controlled randomized trial. It was performed on outpatients who were tested positive for COVID with or without symptoms. Using the Cetylpyridinium chloride or CPC mouthwash, they gargled or washed for 1 minute with either 15 milliliters of colored distilled water or 0.07% CPC. In this study, there were 2 study outcomes that they were interested in. They were interested in the viral load at different time points at 1 and 3 hours, in addition to the nucleocapsid protein levels in saliva at both 1 and 3 hours. There were 118 patients in this study, and they found that the levels of COVID nucleocapsid protein. So taking a quick step back, so what is the nucleocapsid protein? The nucleocapsid protein is a protein that is inside the envelope of the COVID virus. And what they found is that the nucleocapsid protein of lysed virus, so this is virus that was damaged, split open, were significantly higher in the CPC group compared with the control group at both 1 and 3 hours. And this tells us 2 things. It tells us that CPC mouthwash is damaging the COVID virus, causing it to not be able to bind and fuse to anything, and eliminating its infectivity. And 2, that it has a sustained effect. So once you swish and gargle with the mouthwash for at least a minute, then you're going to have about 3 hours of protection at minimum. Because in the extreme case scenario where a person is infected with COVID and are constantly shedding the virus themselves, producing it themselves, it's continuing to lyse and break down the virus 3 hours out. Which means for people that are using this as a preventative measure or as a prophylactic, that it's going to have a good staying effect, because the levels that they're going to come into contact with through their mouth are going to be much, much lower than a person that's continuously shedding virus. But also recall from our previous review that if you're a person infected with COVID, by that 2-hour point, you're going to have not a complete reduction of your viral load, but it's going to be a 50% reduction, so it's going to be starting to increase back up again at 2 hours. But diving back into the paper, it's important to note that the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety of the European Union reviewed the CPC's toxicity, local toxicology, and safety data, and came to the conclusion that oral application of products with CPC concentrations of less than 0.1% are safe for the consumer. So when you're looking for CPC mouthwashes, you're going to want to aim for 0.05% to 0.1%. 0.1% is that top safety rating level, and 0.05% is the minimum effective level for it to be able to inactivate the COVID. And again, when I'm sharing these results, it's important to note that the nucleocapsid protein is an internal protein adhering to the viral genome that is detected at a much larger extent after viral lysis. So when a COVID virus envelope is damaged on the outside, the inside will spill out. So that will include the RNA genome, that will include the nucleocapsid protein, meaning that assessment of the nucleocapsid protein is useful to determine whether the virus is non-viable and thus untransmittable. So again, this is a double-blind, parallel, placebo-controlled randomized clinical trial. It's multi-center, meaning it was done in a lot of different places, so there were 19 primary healthcare centers that were used, specifically in the North Metropolitan Health Administrative Region of Catalonia, and this study was performed between February 2021 and June 2021. On adults 18 years or older who tested positive for COVID, and this positive test had to be within 3 days of enrollment, where they included both patients with asymptomatic or mild COVID symptoms. For the study, a dentist trained participants in the procedure of self-collection unstimulated saliva. Basically, people were trained to spit in a vial, and participants were advised to refrain from brushing their teeth, eating, drinking, except for water during the 3-hour duration of the study activities. So that's another question that comes up every once in a while, kind of like, will drinking water affect it? No, drinking water will not affect the CPC's activity, or at least it won't impact it in a significant way. Although personally, I'd wait 20 to 30 minutes before drinking water for the first time, just to really let the CPC mouthwash settle in your mouth. And again, there are 118 participants in the study where they almost had a complete even split. 58 participants were in the colored distilled water group, the control group, and then about 60 patients were in the 0.07% CPC mouthwash group. Importantly, there were no clinical differences within the groups at baseline levels. And again, what they found is that in non-hospitalized patients with asymptomatic or mild symptomatic COVID infection, a 0.07% CPC mouthwash compared to placebo was associated with a statistically significant increase of nucleocapsid protein levels in saliva, which indicates an increased disruption of viral particles with no infectious capacity. And what's important here is that when they're detecting for viral load itself for that RNA, there's no change over time between the placebo and the CPC mouthwash, but what they are detecting is an increased level of nucleocapsid protein. So this is the control, there's no change, and then this is the CPC mouthwash where it is increasing progressively over time, showing that the COVID viral envelope is being disrupted, which is allowing the RNA to spill out, which is why the detection is not changing because you're still detecting viral RNA, but the fact that it's not infectious any longer because we're detecting a lot of disrupted viral envelopes. That's sort of the semi-confusing takeaway of the study, but it's the important nuance because the viral RNA is spilling out, so you're still detecting it, but you're detecting it because the COVID has been damaged beyond its ability to be able to infect you anymore. Or I should really say to infect others. It does both, because when you have infectious COVID in your mouth and you're swallowing it, you're sort of reinfecting yourself over time. But what's more important is its ability to be able to transmit to others, and this is disrupting that. Another interesting fact is that for CPC mouthwash, it's estimated to have a half-life between 3 and 5 hours, meaning its potential full lasting potential is somewhere between 6 and 10 hours. So it could potentially have protective effects up to that duration of time. But at least from this study, we know that CPC has a lasting impact on the mouth, where it will provide continual protection for about 3 hours at minimum.